Hi guys, I'm Brett from Hearns Hobbies, and today we are servicing and repairing Team Losi XX. Now this is a XXCR actually, so this is probably from circa 1995, 1996. This is from Aaron Defina, and if you watched the other video I did, it was on cleaning and dusting down in between runs. Now I haven't put it back together, we've got the shocks off, so while the shocks are off, let's have a look at rebuilding and servicing 30-year-old shocks off this vintage buggy racer. So let's have a look. I'm just going to put the buggy to the side for the moment. I'm going to put it right there. Okay, so what I have here is 4 shock absorbers. Okay, definitely a child of the 90s with this fluoro and bright colours, which is really cool. So let's go forward and do a shock. Now I'm not going to do all 4 of them because it's the same practice for all. Now the Team Losi shocks at the time were called hard body shocks. So hard anodized, black coated, and they had a Teflon piston inside, I believe. And the unique thing to Team Losi was that they had coloured pistons and coloured shock oil. So you could, when you were servicing your car, if you hadn't let the oil get too old, you could in fact tell what oil was in the shocks in case you'd forgotten. So there was like blue and orange and green, clear, yeah, and red. So they used that to determine now, and I believe they still do, branded under the TLR brand. I think they still do have colour-coded shock oils. So not a bad touch. And the pistons are really good because you can identify them without having to use a magnifying glass or write on them with a texter. So colour-coded, impregnated Teflon. So without further ado, let's get this shock apart and get it oiled. So the first thing I like to do is clean it off, because the last thing that we want to do is get any dirt and debris into the fresh shock. So let's zoom right in a bit. Let's have a look at what we're working with. Okay, like I said, beautiful blue spring. Now I don't actually even have to adjust the preload on the collar here for ride height, but we will start by giving it a good dust off. How good is this sweep pit mat, by the way? I love these silicone pit mats. Really good workstation. If you haven't got yourself one, check them out. Alright, let's give it a good dust off. You can see here whether Aaron Defina fitted or whether the car is in fact a special edition, but it does have gold shock shafts. And I remember back in the day saving up all my hard-earned paper and money, so be it, to hop up my XX with MIP shock shafts of gold nature, because that was cool. It's what the cool kids had, and they look factory. Now most manufacturers offer them as, some of them standard OEM fitment in the kit, some of them as a tuning part or option part for their kits. So, and this is what I would call a sealed cartridge shock. So it doesn't really have a top and a bottom. Most modern shock absorbers are machined top and bottom caps. So the top cap will come off here and the bottom cap will come off here, and the bottom cap, when you take that off, will reveal the O-rings and the bush and the guide. Whereas this one here is pretty much machined one piece of alloy with the cap and the cartridge all in one end. So you effectively have to sort of bleed it upside down. But let's get started. So used to have actual shock tool, a plastic nut that would go on here and like a big wing nut on this end, and that would make it really easy. Unfortunately I don't have 30-year-old tools anymore, so luckily it hasn't been over tight. You can just loosen the cartridge by hand. And I'm going to go here and empty the, now this will see how much Aaron loves his car. How much does he look after his shocks? That said, it might have been sitting on the shelf for 20 years. Now look at that, that is pretty good for a clear oil. So I don't think it's Team Losi oil because it would be coloured. Now it does have a black piston, which is a little bit of surprise, but black is actually one of the colours in the Team Losi rainbow. Just going to get Nan's favourite tea towel and put it down here. Sorry Nan. Like so. And we'll just leave the shock body there to drain out. Put the shock spring retainer here. Now this is the cartridge and the piston, like I said, so I'm going to show you how we check it. First thing I'm going to do is get my verniers out, if I can keep it upright, and measure the shock length. Now I'll check it at the end so I can check left and right, but this is a front shock. I'm just going to get an indicator here. It doesn't really matter what the number is, but it's just going to give me an indication of where to reassemble it to make sure the car is handling the same. In this case it is 19.6 mils. So we've locked that off. Go ahead and I'll grab my soft jaw pliers. Now you want to use soft jaw pliers for this. You don't want to go damaging, especially the nice nitride gold coating. I'm going to unwind the shock end. Get that out of the way. Again, wiping everything as I go because I don't want to reassemble it with any dirt, grit, or grease in there. Then what I'm going to do is actually get my 9 steps gizmo tool, and I'm going to, if I can remember, like I said it has been a long time, clip off the retainer here because this actually provides preload on the O-rings. This should pop off like so. See that clip unclipped, and that will loosen the preload. You can see the first O-ring because I have to pull it over the threaded shock shaft. I want to ensure that there's no resistance there. So the next step I'm going to do is actually get my XTR O-ring and rubber grease, and I'm going to dip the end of the shock shaft in that just to ensure that I'm protecting, because I am reusing. If I wasn't reusing these O-rings I wouldn't be so concerned, but the fact that I'm just giving it a freshen up, I don't believe they were leaking. And just unwind it gently, being sure not to. There we go. And then I can take the retainer off, and it's got a travel limiter spacer in there that would reduce droop overall, and yeah, that reveals the shock shaft. Now for the life of me I can't remember what black Losy piston is, but they used to use an imperial number, like they're always 3 holes if I'm not mistaken. In this case yes, and they use imperial sizes like 50, I think 52, 53, 54, 55 and 56 were the 4 or 5 options that they had, and that is a imperial measurement of the hole, so it would be 3 by 55. And the really cool kids would have the imperial drill bits, and they'd have like a 2 by 56 and a 1 by 55 hole piston, much like we do today. So getting that shock body, and at this point now I can give that shock body a wipe, and we'll see if we can get in there macro and have a look at the anodizing. Now the black anodizing that you can see is absolutely perfect. So this car has done little to no work, because when the anodizing gets old it actually goes through, and it was like a silver alloy, because these are the alloy machine, but it's Teflon coated or hard anodized coated, and Team Losi at the time branding it as hard body shocks, which was a cool fluoro pink sticker by the way. But I can see here that there's gloss black all the way down the shock body, which is really nice. It hasn't scuffed through that lining and gone to silver, which mine was back in the day through its use. Now I like to lay everything out on the cloth and the way that it comes off the car, and I've got the reason I use this because I don't want to use any metal, any sharp objects around these delicate rubber O-rings. So there should be an O-ring, there should be a guide or a bush, and then another O-ring. And the reason that I'm taking this apart very gently, the reason I'm taking this apart is so I can in fact service it, and by service it I mean just really put rubber grease there. And the reason we use rubber grease, that oil is making it really slippery. The reason we put rubber grease in the shock cartridge is in fact to protect the O-rings from the shock oil, because the shock oil, probably not with these older ones, but the current silicon based O-rings or X-rings really get affected by the shock oil themselves, and they swell up. These ones here I believe will be probably nitrile in composition, so a little bit more resistant. They used to wear more than actually leak from wearing, rather than actually swell. The problem we have now is that they swell, and when they swell they don't leak, but they get very tight and actually resistive, so they're not actually working properly because there's a lot of drag in the shock absorber. Oops, that's just bounced away. Got my O-ring here, so just be very careful for it not to bounce away. Put a nice microfiber cloth here, make sure that it's a lint-free cloth, and again I'm bringing out my blue tack here, putting it in the cartridge, pressing it through, making sure there's no dirt and debris on the cartridge, because we don't want to introduce that into our shock oil, because that will not only wreck the O-rings, will damage the shock bodies. Really, really nice. Okay, now it's a matter of putting the O-rings in the rubber grease. You can just use a lid here, don't need heaps and heaps. Giving them a nice liberal coating to help them, give them a nice action on the shock shaft, and also protect them from the shock oil at the same time. The shock bush here, and of course the cartridge. I'll put a little bit in there. There we go. So one O-ring goes in like so. I don't like to push it too far in to make sure it goes straight. We'll follow it in with the bush or the guide, which will help it go in straight like so, and that should all fit together with relatively simple ease. And then the last O-ring like so. There we have it, and that is a service shock cartridge. So I just going to put the grease away for a minute, and then it's literally just about restacking it the way that it came apart. So the cap goes on, sorry, just have to remember because I'm doing it upside down, right? The clip goes on here, so we've got the travel limiter inside the shock back on. We've got the little clip which holds the O-rings and the bush in. Then we can offer the shaft up, just being very gentle with it. You can see here that I did have excess grease. It's just been pushed out here on the end of the shaft. You can get rid of that, and then we can go ahead and put on the clip. I'll just zoom in here. Now I'm not using any tools for this, it should just go on by hand, and rotating it, making sure that it's rotating. There was a little click, I could feel it, and that will not come off now. And you can just move it on the shock shaft, not up to the threads because we don't want to risk cutting the O-rings, making sure that it's all nice and smooth, and it is perfectly so. Okay, now at this point I can go ahead and put my eyelet on, or shock end, making sure it's all nice and straight. Get my shock pliers and wind it up. Now I won't do all four on camera because they're all done exactly the same, but I will show you how we used to bleed them if I can remember. So that's why we measure it, so I just need to come up a little bit. Another half a turn. Perfect. That's what we want to see. Okay, now I'll go ahead and fill it. Now what I am using here is a bit of Axon 30 weight. And I'm just doing a quick version. So you can see here that's threaded shock body. Now the old rule of thumb was you fill it up to the bottom of the threads. Doesn't matter if I go over, it will just bleed out. Like say the bottom of the threads, and then you would usually let it bleed all the air out. But because I'm on camera, we're just going to sort of rush it through a bit, like we're at the racetrack. So then see here it's got a distinct notch cut into the cartridge. Let's see if we can see that on camera. Okay, so we've got a distinct notch cut into the cartridge. That's going to be our air bleed hole. So that's our air bleed hole for the oil to come up, because obviously if it was a thread it would just hydraulic lock. So I'm going to hold that at the top of the shock body. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit if I can. So I want to keep that groove at the top. I'm going to offer the shock up at sort of 45 degrees angle. And I'm going to backwards rotate it until it clicks. To make sure, and there it goes, to make sure the threads are aligned. And then I'm just going to wind it by hand. And that should wind up. And we should see air bubbles coming out of the top here. Because I've overfilled it, probably not so much. Because it's pretty much just oil coming out now. Keeping that relief hole at the top as the highest part of the damper unit so the air can escape. And then I'm going to push the piston down. See the air coming out now? Like so. Meanwhile holding it down and rotating it again, keeping that air hole at the top. And then I'm going to wipe it off and see how we did. Rule of thumb is it usually takes a couple of goes to get it right, because usually it will have too much oil in it. You can see that little bit of rebound. That's a little bit too much oil, so it's as simple as forcing it down, unwinding it half a turn and winding it up until that, see, that has gone away. So that's definitely not overfull with oil. Then I can go ahead now and tighten it up with my tool. So you can see here that it was pretty easy to bleed. It did take a couple of goes. So not having the right tool, it's not going to rattle apart. You just do it up by hand. My finger there on the bottom. And we've got no rebound, which is really nice. We'll give it a good wipe over and we'll call that one done and see how it feels. It's going to look nice and shiny from all the excess oil that I put over filling it. Put on the spring, put on the spring retainer, and here we go. And we should hear little to no air. It's not squealing. There's no air in there. Whereas if I get one that hasn't been rebuilt, you can hear that squealing of the air in the shock, and that just comes from wear and tear. So that is a beautiful rebuilt 30-year-old Losy shock. So hope you've enjoyed that video, found it a little bit insightful. Thank you to Aaron Defina for letting me rebuild his buggy, and I'm Brett from Hearns, and thanks for watching me rebuild the shocks on a Team Losi XX.